Gemara in Megillah says, Ma Rata Esther. What did Esther see that she invited Haman to the Suda she made? She made a Suda. She psychs herself up. She engages for 3 days in fasting, in tshuva, in davening. She's getting herself ready. She calls all the Am Yisrael to engage in this process, the entire Am Yisrael. At the end of that time, she goes to see the king. So Achashverosh says to her, "What do you want? I'll give you anything anything you want." So she says, Ad Chatzi Malchut. So she says, "You know what I'd like? I'd like you and Haman to come to a Suda that I've prepared. I'd like you both to come to the Suda." So then, okay, they have a Suda. Then he says in the Suda, he's having a good time, and he says, "What would you like? What would you like?" And she says, "I'd like you and Haman to come back tomorrow to another Suda that I am preparing." So the Gemara says, "Ma Rasa Esther." What did Esther see? She says, "Zimata Haman la Suda," that she chose to invite Haman to the Suda. An interesting, strange part of the story. Let her invite her husband, Achashverosh. Let her invite Achashverosh to this Suda. She can butter him up, and then she can make her request. But she's inviting Haman? What's going on? So the Gemara asks that question, and it describes a conversation that took place over the course of 500 years, where various Tanoim, the Chachmei HaMishnah, the Chachamim that appear, who star in the Mishnah, they weigh in, and they give answers. And the conversation continued beyond their time to the Chachmei HaGemara, the Amoraim. The rabbis who appear in the Gemara part, the Tanoim in the Mishnah, the Amoraim in the Gemara, and they all give answers. By the time the Gemara is done, they have proposed 12 different answers, 12 different answers. When you look at the answers, we would say, well, wait, which of those ideas, which solution is correct? Which one is it? Which one is it? If you understand, if you go through Megillah Esther with any one of them, so each answer is sufficient. Each answer is sufficient to explain and to animate the story on a much deeper level. So it raises it be outside of the realm, above the plane of being a two-dimensional little fairy tale with a bunch of cardboard cutouts of people who have no character, no motivation, no fears, no foibles, no nothing. That's how we look at most things in Tanakh. But to understand any one of these. So for example, one of the Chachamim who weighs in to say that Esther decided to make Achashverosh jealous. It was a desperate move on her part, a well-calculated move. So she wanted Achashverosh to wonder, wait a second, a romantic dinner between a husband and wife, I understand that. What is this person? He has nothing to do with it. Like, how does he figure in? He doesn't belong. Doesn't belong. So he says at the party, he's having a good time. He says, "Oh, what are you?" She says, "I'd like you and Haman to come a little romantic dinner for the three of us." That should be awkward. It should be awkward for Haman. Like, what's he doing there? So Achashverosh leaves, and there's a nagging feeling, and he starts to think through. Now, if you go through all the events of the story, Haman at the very beginning of the story, the drama. So he's the one who gives the advice to Achashverosh to get rid of Vashti. That opens up the position. There's a job opening for the queen of the Persian Median Empire. And Esther ends up getting the job. She owes her position to Haman and the things that he had done. So Achashverosh is thinking, well, that's a very strange thing. Now, if they were to, and you can imagine people forming alliances, who knows how far back this goes? And he's thinking, well, those kinds of things, I would know something about it, I imagine. I mean, I must have friends. Certainly a king has people who are loyal to him. Unless those people who are loyal know that, they stick their neck out, they run the risk, but there's got to be some reward. So he can't sleep that night. And he's tossing and turning, and he goes and he says, "I'd like to have the chronicles of the kings read." So they read a story and they say, oh, there was an assassination attempt, there was a plot, and someone stepped up, Mordecai stepped up and saved the king's life. So the king says, really? Oh my gosh, that's pretty good. That's a great thing. It's a great thing. He says, wait, how did I reward him? In what dramatic fashion that would make everybody in the kingdom know you helped the king out? You stick your neck out for the king. It's worth your while. It's worth your while. And they say, What reward did he? He got nothing. He got nothing. Achashverosh starts to panic. Well, wait a second. Nothing. So he says, I've got to reward him in the most dramatic fashion so people know if they have information, because you can't plan any kind of crime without people knowing. There are going to be people around. I say that to you not as a lay person, but as someone who spent the last 22 years working with the FBI and law enforcement. I'm not at liberty to tell you the exact details, but if you're going to plot a crime, there are going to be a lot of people involved, and we'll get you. So he says, I need something dramatic, a dramatic display, so people will say, oh my gosh, the king, he takes care of his buddies. The people who take care of him, he takes care of them. So he creates this whole thing. Once that happens and the tide starts to turn, so Haman is a little thrown by that, and the story begins to unravel. That's how now I didn't do justice to that, but I just told you it's ridiculous. It's embarrassing. We'd have to go through every line in the Megillah, which is how some of Farshim do with this particular answer proposed by that particular, that particular Chacham. I don't remember if it was a Tana or an Amora who gave that answer, but somebody quite authoritative. You could explain every line in the thing. Psychologically, it makes perfect sense. And the fact is that the king is already, by the time it comes to the second Suda, he is angry. He's looking at Haman with a jaundiced, suspicious eye. Haman says something and the king is ready to pounce. He comes back in and he says, oh, you and the queen? Wait, who said anything about him and the queen? He's been stewing on this, cycling through it for the last 24 hours, and he's now seeing his suspicions, his fears are confirmed. Haman is there in some kind of private huddle with the queen. Oh my gosh, that's the end of him. Okay, that's a great answer. It's a great answer. Another one of the Chachmei HaGemara, he gives a different answer, and he says this. He says, what was Esther thinking that she invited him? He said, I'll tell you what. The Gemara elsewhere says, how is it that Haman reached such a position of power? There must have been something. HaKadosh Baruch Hu was paying him off for something. In other words, HaKadosh Baruch Hu isn't mekapech schar of any beria. He doesn't withhold the reward of any human being. A person does something good, they get rewarded. HaKadosh Baruch Hu sees to that. If a person's smart, they say like this, they say, I would like my reward for whatever good I've done. I would like it deposited in the first national bank of Shamayim. I want it there gaining, I want it growing. I want it to sit away. I don't want to draw on it. I don't want to receive it in this world, because this world is a temporary, finite place. What's the best I could do? What could he do? You can imagine, like, what's the best that HaKadosh Baruch Hu do to pay me off the reward, the infinite reward for a mitzvah that I would do? I don't want that. He's going to give me, going to bring back, mint flavored Snapple? HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the reason that they discontinued that flavor was that thousands of days of tefillin wearing, hundreds of thousands of hours of wearing tzitzis, of learning Torah. I was burning through my sachar. You can't imagine the rate. I used to buy cases of mint Snapple. In the beginning, it wasn't kosher. Back in the early 90s, then it became kosher, and I consumed thousands of bottles. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu was looking at the books one day, and he was like, this guy's got nothing left. So he had them discontinue the flavor, thank God. So since that time, I've been desperately trying to build up some reserve, something. I can't tell you how little I have. The fact is, though, that that's a foolish thing to do, like to say, oh, I'm going to take it. I want to be paid in that form. So if a person's smart, they'll say, you know what? I believe in Olam Haba. That's a good thing, to be able to sit and hear a course in Chakiras from Reb Chaim Brister, Reb Chaim Soloveitchik. What unbelievable! He'll be talking for eternity, and we could attend it. Incredible. I want that. I want to reward in the next world that I'll open up a Gemara and I'll finally understand anything of what they're saying. Oh, priceless. Some people, though, are foolish. What they say is like this. They say, in this temporal, this temporary, this illusory world in which we find ourselves, I want that. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that's why every corner, has a liquor store. What do they call it? A package store? There's wine, there's beer, there's stuff. If HaKadosh Baruch Hu says you want to, there's tons of stuff. There's tons of stuff, tons of opportunities. The Gemara asks somewhere, what did Haman do? What good did he do? And the Gemara has a few different possibilities. It identifies within the story itself, and Haman appears other places in Tanakh, not just in Megillah Esther. But the Gemara identifies a few things. A few things. He gave a few pennies to tzedakah in a certain context. He wasn't always intending to do the thing with the fullest sincerity, but he did some good things. HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't withhold the reward for any person. So Esther knew that, and she said, look, you know what? This guy, he doesn't have thousands of zechuyot, to his credit. He's got a few. He's got a few. Now, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is paying him off. HaKadosh Baruch Hu made him the second in command of this kingdom, this empire that controls the entire civilized world. But it's not going to last forever. And he doesn't have a limitless and inexhaustible supply of zechut. He has a certain amount. So she said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to force him to empty out his bank account. So she has a suda. Think of the kavod. She makes a royal banquet. It's an intimate banquet for the king and queen of the empire, the rulers of the civilized world. That's what she does. And she says, and I'd like Haman to be there. Haman shows up. Oh, the kavod. Everyone in the palace, everyone in the kingdom. It's like, how does he rate? He goes home and he's telling his family, do you understand? Do you understand the kavod I got today? The kavod? Kavod's a big deal for a lot of people. A big deal for a lot of people. For him, it's a huge deal. And he says, right, it says all of his, right, Zeresh, his wife, and all his Ohavav, they're there, and he's telling them, this is the kavod that I get, I enjoy. And not only that, he tells them, not only that, I'm invited again tomorrow. She invited me again tomorrow. And he comes in the next day, he is pompous and he's posturing and he's so proud of himself. And when Esther, now, you know what happened? Esther was busy causing him to present big checks against the account that he had of Sachar for whatever good he had done in this world. She was forcing him to run the account to empty it out. She was driving it down to zero as fast as she could. As it turns out, it took how many sudas like that, right, to which he was invited? How many times could he be invited? 2. And then the bank account ran dry. And then HaKadosh Baruch Hu could get rid of him. The Am Yisrael could get rid of him. If he had had enough zechut in his bank account, so she would have said at the second one, she would have said, I'd like to have a banquet tomorrow. I'd like to have a banquet tomorrow. I'd like the king to proclaim international Haman Day. She would have kept giving him kavod day after day. She would have made suda after suda until the account ran dry. So it turned out it took 2 days. Then the accounts ran dry. If you listen to that answer, if you look at the psukim, you'll see indications of that. Oh my gosh, it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. That's the nature. That's the way Esther was thinking. Now, those are 2 very different answers. Very different. One is a very psychological answer. She was going to inspire a sense of jealousy in her husband. That Haman, and she might be planning something. She's plotting something. There, she was exposing herself to tremendous risk because the king could say, I'm going to get rid of Haman and I'm going to get rid of Esther. They're in cahoots. She was exposing herself to tremendous danger. But she was a savvy woman. The strategy in that, she was playing a political game, a psychological game of cat and mouse. Brilliant. The second answer that I went through with you just now, the second answer is the explanation of someone, the analysis of someone who is a ma'amina, a person who has tremendous belief in HaKadosh Baruch Hu's system of sachar ve'onish, of reward and punishment, who believes in all of the tenets, the principles of Torah hashkafa. Those are 2 very different answers. If you go through all 12, it would be worth it to have a Livnos course. And the course would consist of going through all 12 answers. By the way, the Gra offers a 13th one. He says at one point in his commentary, he says, had I been there during those 500 years, I would have proposed, and he gives a completely different answer, a 13th answer, unlike any of the other ones. That would be a course, a semester-long course. At the end, we would stagger out of it, overwhelmed by the genius of each of these answers proposed. We would think to ourselves, these Tanoim, these Amoraim, oh my gosh, these are geniuses that they identified that. They identified these facets, these dimensions. It's unbelievable. The Tanoim, the Amoraim, geniuses. So the Gemara ends. The Gemara describes that one of the Amoraim had interaction with Eliyahu HaNavi. Eliyahu HaNavi appeared to this particular Amora. And the Amora said to Eliyahu HaNavi, can you answer a question? It has been bothering us for the last 500 years. Eliyahu HaNavi says, and that would be what? He says, Marata Esther. What did Esther see that she invited Haman to the Suda? Which of these Tanoim, which of these Amoraim, who was right? Eliyahu HaNavi laughs and he says, Kikule Tanoe or Kikule Amorai. You're joking, right? He says, you're kidding. You're going to think you guys are big shot. These Tanoim, the Tanoim are the Chachmei HaMishnah. The Amoraim are the Chachmei HaGemara. They're the giants of the Jewish people, of the human race. Their minds, we drink from the wells of their Torah every day. Everything we do in our life, everything. We understand everything, the Tanakh, we understand everything based on these people. These are the giants. Their minds are giant intellects, gigantic Torah intellects. Eliyahu HaNavi says, you're kidding. You think that you would compare yourselves? He says, Esther, not Esther Hamalka. The fact that she was a queen, that was tragic. Esther HaTzadeket. Esther the righteous, that's the right way to call it. To call her Esther the queen, it was the worst tragedy in her life that she was the queen. She could have been married, had a Jewish family. She could have raised Jewish children. She could have taught them Torah. That's the noblest job for any Jewish man or woman, the best. She sacrificed herself and ended up as the queen. So Eliyahu HaNavi said her intellect encompassed what all of those Tanoim thought and all those Amoraim. When she did the analysis to figure out, what should she do? She was running through every possibility. What moves were available to her? So she said, she worked through her gigantic mind. Her mind encompassed what all the Tanoim and all the Amoraim knew and more. Eliyahu HaNavi says, what they knew, all the ideas they came up with and more. There were dimensions to her planning that the Tanoim and Amoraim couldn't even guess. She anticipated that answer from the Gra. There have been answers given throughout history from other Mefarshim, other commentators as well. Anything anybody came up with, and there are dimensions when Mashiach comes, we'll have an opportunity. We'll say to her, what were you thinking? Why did you invite him? And she'll give more answers besides, more answers. Those answers are not chakiras. Those answers are all answers that coexist, and she covered the full spectrum of the human experience, the psychological, the mystical, the political, the halachic. Each one of the answers is wildly different, but they're not chakiras because they exist in the same timeline and the same reality. That's an important thing to remember.